why do we think that there seem to be, particularly, we'll say, AAA games, the vast majority of them, especially the most successful ones, have violence in them, like The Last of Us, like God of War, like the Horizon franchise, Gears of War, Modern Warfare, well, Call of Duty, any one of those, Battlefield. Why do we think that there seem to be so many more, especially larger scale games, that have to have violence in them?
Well, I think that it comes down to lazy writing, lazy design. Actually, I think it's a lot of the time the violence fill the gaps between the story. I mean, when I played Final Fantasy VII all those years ago, which I loved, one of the most annoying things about it, whenever you travelled, there was all these like random encounters in A and B, just trying, minding your own business, just trying to get to the next town or the next bit of point, and monsters pop up and to fight them. And it just got really, because it didn't add anything to the story. It just slowed you down. So I think, balancing games is extremely difficult. So lazy writing, because I know that it's difficult. It is a difficult process, and I think there aren't very many things to do. But I think fighting in a way to engage requires them to physically do something. So you have to press the right combination of buttons at the right time in order to win, and that's engaging. It's just you have to think, and you have to walk your character over there and press and ask it to press the right button. That's less reliant on your physical and more reliant on your mental skill set, and not people play for different reasons. So I think that's one of the reasons why violence is so in the games thing, that it's because that's what they think people want. We're only really the movie discovering that people do diverse set of actors, and characters, and that films headed by women, led by women, can actually be blocked. I think there's the same problem in the gaming industry. We talk about the gaming industry designing games for mythical gamer that actually doesn't necessarily even isn't necessarily the majority. So I think there's I think it probably goes a lot into our psyche. So probably quite boringly just about mechanics of how do you engage your play physically, which is why virtual reality might open up proper virtual reality might open up a whole heap of different in that respect.
Yeah.
I'm probably not good.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I won't think about that. I won't think about that for the time being. Alex, what do you think?
I think there's not too much more I can add to Gem's point, really, other than to say that there's probably developers are thinking, well, there's this formula where there's this amount of violence in the game, and we use it in this way in these scenarios, and that's our tried and tested formula. Don't fix what's broken. Actually, that's not the phrase, is it? But you know which one I mean. Yeah. And then there's also the side of it where things will be ultra violent, and they'll be like, maybe this is what we need for the shock and awe factor. It's like in films where they just put it in for no other reason other than to shock and awe the audience. and to capture their attention. I think it's a change of pace sometimes, maybe because everyone feels like our attention spans are like this much shorter. Nowadays, they need to mix it up with more combat and more violence and more crash bang Wolof and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a very quick, not to borrow a phrase from Jem, but it is just a very quick win for a lot of games, is to just be like, oh well, we know people like fights, let's put a fight in here. Or we know people like watching people's heads get cut off, let's put that in here. Yeah, stuff like that really. But I don't know, I don't think there's much more to add. I think Jem summed it up really nicely.
Yeah, I particularly agree with the you almost
That's right.
you sparked a tiny bit of anger in me thinking about
Oh,
no,
did
no,
I?
it was
Oh,
Jem.
No,
It
it's
was
always
Jem's
me.
fault. I was just thinking about how violence is, it just adds time to things.
Mm.
If Abzu and Journey are only a couple of hours long, you could probably stretch them to like 10 hours if you included a half-baked combat system.
Mm.
And
hmm.
it's, I find some games, the writing and the story is so good that you don't, if they took the combat completely out, it could stand up on its own just as a game without combat.
Mm.
That's the kind of game that I really admire the most.
Mm.
And then it makes you really value the combat, because you really, and Alex, you mentioned it earlier, the curiosity.
Mm.
I find most games, they've got collectibles that is just you just pick them up like feathers from Assassin's Creed 2 that are they're just feathers, and you've got to get 100 of them. And then when you finally collected all of them, I think your mother says something for the first time in the entire game, and you go, oh, what did I do all that for? Whereas there are collectibles in The Last of Us Part 2, for example.
Mm.
I just want to find every one of them. Reading about Isaac, who's the leader of the wolves uh, in Seattle, what he is a fascinating, monstrous character. And there are notes from the rebellion that he led like 20 years ago in how he overthrew the Fedrin that were there. And I would just want to give me a list, just show me those little tidbits.
Yeah.
And they tell an incredible storytelling. And the problem with that kind of storytelling is hard, and it's arduous, and it's just so much easier to say, right, we want to charge them £70 for a game. We'll make the worst form of lightsaber combat I could possibly come up with. This was the annoying bit that we can come up with to just get us to string out this experience, because it doesn't matter because they've got their money already. Yeah, so I think because it's easy.
But
I think that's the start. That's the heart of it.
there is something about the adrenaline rush that you get from a fight scene in a game, and like the sort of like the tension and the yeah, I mean there is that you're not going to get that from, well, you might get it from having do a complicated physically complicated puzzle, like maybe having to run.
Or one with
Zelda,
like
I think does that.
time thing. Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, Zelda has fighting in it, but I think it also does have quite a lot of adrenaline going on in the puzzles as well, and so I suppose you can get it a bit, but it is an easier an easier fix. And I think, you know, the point, the notes and things that you find in Last of Us, I read every single word of every single nonce in that game, and I'm terrible for just being like, yeah, get on with it. I mean, I love story-based games, but if I have to do too much reading, I'm not interested. Click through it. So that's a huge testimony to the game writers that I stopped and paused and read everything. So, you know, I think there wouldn't be to be gained. I'm not definitely not anti-violence in games.
We'll see if we can. We'll see what we all think about in terms of like how do we as feminists classify non-violence in games. But before that, we've touched on it a little bit. How do we? I think it's easier to make games with violence compelling because you're having to fight. You're literally having to fight to get to the next part of the game. But with games without violence, how do game developers compel us to continue with the game? Why do we play games that don't have any violence in?
Mystery and exploration, I'd say, sum it up quite nicely for me. Yeah, definite sense of mystery because that motivates you to find out what's going on. And then exploration is just, if a game is beautiful to look at, you want to see more of it. What's around the next corner? You know, what environment am I going to find now? Yeah, that's my very concise answer to that question. But yeah, I love doing that in games. So
yeah, I think that's right. It's exploration. It's wanting to know what's around the next corner. I played a game a few years ago called East Shade, which I don't think I've mentioned. It's a game where you play I think you're like a painter or a photographer. Anyway, the idea is that you have to take photos in certain positions within the world.
yeah,
People give you commissions and ask you, oh, I want this picture, I want that picture, and you have to. And sometimes they're time dependent, so you have to wait until night and then photo. And it's a beautiful world that's not the real world because it's all the inhabitants are all sort of animal people. But it's just fascinating, and it's just about exploring this world. You can pick things up and do. There's no thing that I saw in the and yeah.
You're not thinking of Toem, are you? Because that's quite similar.
No.
I was thinking, I played a photography game called Toem. And it's all sort of like animated, like TOEM. It's quite hard to say. It was on
I've
PS
heard of
Plus,
that. Yeah,
yeah, it's quite similar to what you're describing now. But yeah,
no, and it's weird.
Okay,
it's like
I'll have to look that one up.
up.
Okay, cool. Yeah,
but
yeah, no, Toem's really similar.
I've heard of
it's more animated,
that.
I think. Yeah.
So I think that's the thing, is that there is something in the exploration and the item gathering and the.
Yeah, I think the I don't think I answered earlier on about the game that impacted me the most. It's probably heard of the Talos principle.
Yes, there's been a trailer for
There's a
the
second
second one. Did you know that? Yeah, they've announced it. They announced it last week. Talos Principle 2. And I was like, well, the first game must be amazing because this looks amazing. I've never played it. Is it good? Is it good? Would you
It's
recommend
the apex of a peaceful puzzle game. It's like
Awesome.
a really chilled out Portal.
Nice.
I can't.
Yeah.
It's just an absolute joy to it's such an experience really simple and chill and peaceful, but with that slight edge of, we're doing this because something isn't quite right somewhere. You know that there's that
Yeah.
curiosity of, oh, this place is beautiful. These puzzles are interesting. What's that? What does that mean? And you go through the puzzles thinking, that thing back there didn't make much sense. And just that slight, that edge to it. And it's just, and the music is beautiful. The look is beautiful. The puzzles are just perfectly balanced, unlike The Witness, which is just
That
stupid
was hard.
impossibility that you.
That was so
This
hard.
is actually designed that
Yeah.
in the similar way that Portal is, that you just need to spend time in the puzzles, feeling, I want to know what I want to. You collect sigils, and every time you finish a puzzle, you go, aha, and you get this big sigil, and it's just that's the best non-violent game I think I've ever played. So, 100% worth doing it.
I would definitely
Yeah, I'm
check it
going
out.
to suggest it to my mum. She loves puzzle games.
Yeah, honestly, it's just the special kind of understated beauty that these kinds of games have to have. That on top of the curiosity and story, fantastic bit of stagecraft from the Last of Us TV show. I was listening to the podcast version of, not the version, the podcast interview of the two showrunners, and it was the episode where Joel and Ellie get to Jackson for the first time, and they find Joel's brother, and there's no physical action in that entire episode, which is completely different from the rest of the series. And they said that in this kind of episode, the conversations are action pieces. The conversations that are happening between the biggest one from that I remember is Joel and Tommy. And that is just as visceral and impactful as if it had just been a fight between them. And I really think that that's like the core of what these games like should be aimed for. Going that we don't need all the bullshit of a big fight. We don't need all the fanfare. We don't need all this. We don't need to stretch it to 10 hours. We'll keep it to 3 hours. And we know that we're going to be desperate to find out what's going to happen when these two characters come together again after this.
The pen is mightier than the sword, to quote Indiana Jones, which was quoting something else. But yeah,
I think that's like the oldest quote ever. And in Hitman, the guy who's like the biggest good guy at the end of it, all of it, he says, I have found that whoever holds the sword decides who wields the pen.
That's a good one as well.
Excellent bit of wisdom. Just things the writers can do if they choose to. That's what I think they should be going for.
It was written by novelist and Bulwer Lytton in 1830. 1830.
Good to know. Wow.
But they have
Google
pens,
is your
then.
friend.
Feathers. Scrolls.
The feather is
the
quill is mightier than the sword.
Yes. Quill. Yes, quill's the word, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm going to put our feminist hats on for a moment. I'll take off. I don't know. extra feminism, our
Yeah.
stereotypical feminist side. Are non-violent games more feminist than violent games? I'm not sure how I feel about this or what this question means itself, but there's just something. There's something here between feminism and violence and non-violence that I just think there's something there to be explored.
I think that non-violent games demonstrate a move away from the polarized and violent world that's kind of overseen and controlled by the patriarchal system. So I don't think that violent games are inherently non-violent. That non-violent games are inherently no. That violent games are inherently non-feminist, or vice versa. But I think that what non-violent games represent is that you can do things differently, and violence doesn't have to be the only way that things are, and there are other ways of humans interacting. I mean, the vast majority of people do not experience violence in their data, and so our games represent that. So I think it's I think it's an interesting thing. I think probably it doesn't have anything to do with the other, but if we wanted to sort of think about it, then yeah, that would be my thought.
Mm.
What do you think,
Yeah,
Alex?
no, I think I'd agree. And I had a thought also about like just the amount of violence that we're exposed to in games and also in like film and TV and other media. I do feel, especially from a young age, that I became quite desensitized to it pretty early on.
Mm.
So, like to me, obviously, playing Tomb Raider from like the age of 8 or 9 or however old I was, it wasn't such a big deal for me to watch gory films, whereas some of the girls like that we would watch the same films and they'd be a lot more freaked out by the violence than I was. And I think that's probably due to my exposure to like violence in video games. So I was just having a think about that and how saturated they are with violence is just pretty much everywhere. So having non-violent games is pretty much needed, and we can't not have them, obviously. And I think, like Jem said, they do represent a way in which things can be done differently, and there doesn't need to be this reliance on violence telling the story that you want to tell, which I think is really important to remember. Which I know doesn't answer your first question, Matt, but it's just some thoughts that have occurred to me, like while we've been talking, really.
Yeah,
I think that's a really good mix, actually. That what you said about violence. It basically is normalizing violence, isn't it? Having violence in games, and we've talked about that and about the sort of impact that having violent games sort of normalizes this idea of that violence is a kind of natural part of life, and that can then inoculate people against standing up against violence when they're confronted with it in the real world.
Very
Sorry,
true.
Matt, I spoke over you.
No, I was just going to agree that it's an unusual question that doesn't have it's not a clear. You can't go yes, of course, or no, of course not to it, which means that there's something there to be talked about.
Definitely.
Yeah, they're talking about, because we're not talking about violence today. It's like going into, there's problems. There are problems with it, but we don't know exactly what they are and what to do about them. I wrote this next question on the assumption that we would all be about like 10% in terms of how many non-violent games we played. So I'll expand it to, what do you guys think is the stereotype of someone who never plays violent games? If someone said to you,
Mm.
"Oh, I don't like playing violent games," what would you react to that?
That's fine. Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. If I had to, well, trying to think of examples of a stereotypical non-violent gamer, probably like more of a casual gamer, I would say. If I had to pin it somewhere, they'd probably be. Oh, I don't know. That's not necessarily true though, but perhaps they're more likely to be more of a casual gamer and play shorter games like the ones we've mentioned, or more puzzly games. On different platforms as well. They may not necessarily have like a console, because they obviously require a lot of time and investment. And if gaming is a serious hobby of yours, you're probably more likely to have a console
or two.
So it's probably someone who plays on something like even a tablet or a mobile, or just a laptop, so not a gaming laptop or a PC or anything like that. And so would probably be more likely to play smaller, more puzzly, more story-based type games. Beyond that, I don't want to make any horrible assumptions, I guess. So yeah, that would be my answer to that question.
All of the above, and I'm
Yeah.
going to address the elephant in the room and say, and I would probably assume they were female.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's probably more likely to appeal to female gamers than male gamers. That's not to say that male gamers don't play non-violent games,
No,
but it's probably more likely they'll be female.
but I mean,
Yeah.
assumptions, make an ass out of you.
Yeah,
And
they do. They do.
Yeah, I had the same sort of. I think I had two sort of like concepts in mind. The one is someone who only plays, who just happens to only play games that don't have any violence in, because it's just casual and they don't really think about it. That's one where I go, well, that whatever, just that person's just doing what they feel like doing. Whereas the one I just thought of now was people who restrict themselves from things, like a similar way to people who never swear, not even in private, not even in their heads. They just go, I never swear, or I never ever ever drink, or I never and never ever do these things. I restrict myself from these things, and I just think, I think
never
that's
is a long
unhealthy.
time.
It is a long time.
So that's sort of an element of judgment comes in from me, that I notice from myself, of anyone who says I don't allow myself to do something. I think that's where, like, feminists, of course, from all of us, can enjoy ultra violent games as much as anyone, and the act of someone playing an ultra violent game, or woman playing an ultra violent game, is infinitely more like empowering than a woman who says, I only play, I don't think women should be violent, so I only play non-violent games.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's complicated. And I just want everyone to relax and do what they feel like doing. That's all I want.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want people to go, well, I'm going to arbitrarily restrict myself and things. I think that'll do for tonight. Have you either of you got anything else you want to say?
I don't think I do. No.
No, I was just going to suggest The Room for non-violent recommends, which is really good.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. Yeah.
Yeah, because you go.
Cool.
But the only problem with it is that you do need to play it in a darkened room because it's such a dark game.
Sounds scary. Is it scary?
It's mystical in its puzzles. So
Okay,
but
cool.
it's all sort of dark,
Yeah,
and dingy, and it's you have to work the puzzles out and go to the next room. But that's it. That's my recommendation.
Nice.
Cool. In that case, thank you everyone for watching or listening. You know that we release new episodes every Thursday at 7 p.m. One final reminder, patreon.com/gaming the system. And if you're listening in 2023, mid-2023, you can come and see us at Cardiff on the 9th to the 10th of September. So we'll see you there, hopefully. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.